Welcome everyone to AURI Connect's Webinar Wednesday, part of AURI Connect's monthly online series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. I'm Dan Scogan, the Director of Government and Industry Relations, and your host on Webinar Wednesday. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota, with sponsorship from Bremer Bank. This program aims to actively engage all participants in the food and ag industry to improve competitiveness of producers, businesses, and entrepreneurs. They do this through ongoing purposeful connections of resources and partners along the value chain and increased knowledge of opportunities, technologies, and trends. Remember, this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Remember also that you will be muted during our presentations, but you can send us your written questions through the Q&A portal on your screen. Today, we will have a deep dive discussion around commercial kitchen availability in Minnesota, where they are, who's using them, and where are the gaps in the value chain around these important kitchens. Joining the discussion today will be Emily Jervey. Emily is a marketing supervisor in the Agriculture Marketing and Development Division at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. In this capacity, she coordinates and promotes MDA's local, regional, domestic, and international marketing services for agriculture, food, and beverages. Emily has been with MDA for 14 years in a variety of areas, including agricultural statistics and international marketing. AURI's own Jason Robinson will be adding to the conversation. Jason is the Business Development Director for Food for the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute. In this role, he works with food clients to develop their businesses to further the value-added development of Minnesota's agricultural products. Prior to joining AURI, Jason spent 19 years in corporate research and development at a Fortune 500 food manufacturer as a product and process developer across several food technologies. Jason brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in the end-to-end new product development process. When we get to our Q&A part of the program today, we'll also include the thoughts from Aaron Heidecker. Aaron's a senior program manager with Clutch, a business acceleration firm helping agriculture and food businesses find and realize their peak potential. She's deeply rooted in brand development and strategic planning across the food channel, spanning both CPG and QSR. During her time with Clutch, Erin has grown her knowledge in both the food and ag space, helping to manage and prioritize projects with internal teammates and external decision makers. Also joining us during the Q&A will be Emily Paul. Emily is a partner and vice president of Food Works Group and has led teams and organizations for over a decade in the nonprofit and for-profit food space in addressing the locality and seasonality, as well as culture, economic, and equity factors of local food systems. Emily works to address the needs of food institutions, nonprofit organizations, and individual entrepreneurs, as well as the systems in which these stakeholder groups are connected, with deep experience in hunger relief, kitchen operations, and nonprofit strategy. But to kick off our webinar Wednesday today, we welcome first to the program, Erin Jervey from MDA. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Emily Jervey. I'm one of the Emilys on the call today. I supervise the marketing team at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and I wanted to say a big thank you to AURI for having me and for incorporating MDA into this important work. It's great having such a great working relationship with the organization. Thank you to Clutch and the Food Works Group for doing the work in this study, and for all of the facility owners and entrepreneurs that contributed their experience to this issue. So I wanted to address briefly the importance of the commercial business model to MDA and our marketing team. This directly touches the work of our New Markets program. The goal of that program is to increase the use of Minnesota agricultural ingredients, create and protect jobs, and promote economic development in Minnesota's agriculture and food sector. So this is directly related to that program. And essentially, the MBA and the New Markets program spend a lot of time and resources working with entrepreneurs getting started, but it doesn't do much good if the businesses and entrepreneurs can't stay in Minnesota and find a space to scale up and be successful in manufacturing their product. So throughout this webinar and future discussions, we're keenly looking to see what role we can play in the future of the shared use commercial kitchen business model. To date, there are direct and indirect roles that we can play. And as noted in this report, the challenges in each region are very unique and nuanced, and the solutions are not straightforward. So it's going to take a community to address this issue, and we're ready. So the direct support we can provide in this space is pretty much in the form of grants and funding. And I wanted to note that with this budget cycle, the governor is proposing an additional $250,000 for grants to facilitate the startup, modernization, and expansion of co-packing facilities, commercial kitchens, and other key supply chain infrastructure, such as shared cold chain capacity. These funds may also be used to assist value-added processors with food safety and environmental sustainability guideline planning and third-party certification services. So the base appropriation for this is $250,000 through 2026 and thereafter. This is dedicated funding for this space, and we're super excited. Hopefully we'll know more in May, but we have proposed that with the collaboration of our stakeholders and partners. And then indirect support, one example of that is support we can provide to local and regional economic development commissions, specifically in the area of kitchen directories. This is something we've had conversations on internally. But we're definitely open to new ideas and new roles we can play. So thank you very much. One quote I wanted to highlight from the report is that we've done shared use version 1.0, but what is version 2.0 of shared kitchens? What does that look like? And so we're standing by and excited to be part of version 2.0. So thank you very much, and I will hand it over to Jason.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emily. It's great to be here today. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be able to share the results of this work on behalf of the project team with you today. We kicked off this work almost 12 months ago through AURI's Agricultural Innovation Partnership Program in partnership with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. This program was designed to catalyze innovation, generate new ideas, and otherwise support collaborative partnerships that advance Minnesota's value-added agricultural industry. The genesis of this specific work was in the realization that, in our work in the food system, we were beginning to see a number of shared use commercial kitchens that were shutting down in the metro. On top of that, we were hearing anecdotal evidence from our legislative partners that there simply weren't enough kitchens available for entrepreneur use in rural Minnesota. So we began to ask ourselves as an organization, is this truly a supply issue? Or is the business model of a shared use commercial kitchen simply severely challenged? In working with our research partners at Clutch and the Foodworks Group, we found that the answer to both of those questions is yes, but we'll dive into that shortly. But to level set, before we really get started, let's start with what is a shared use commercial kitchen? A shared use kitchen is really a food business first and foremost, but a food business with the exclusive purpose of providing commercial space and equipment to multiple business entities to commercially prepare or handle food offered for wholesale, resale, or for distribution. To be very clear, these are state-inspected and licensed spaces that an entrepreneur typically utilizes as a first production space to get into wholesale distribution. The goals of this project were clear from the outset and characterized by these three research questions. First, what is broken in the model for shared use commercial kitchens? Second, what contributes to success or failure of these operations in Minnesota? And third, how do these challenges differ in rural and urban communities? With this research, we, as ecosystem support organizations, hoped to identify actions that could foster growth and development in the shared use commercial kitchen sector, while also keeping our scope limited to the emerging food business scale. So in other words, higher scale food production beyond shared use commercial kitchens, typically referred to as contract manufacturing, which Emily referred to earlier, was not explicitly explored in this study. So let's start by diving a bit into the methodology of the research, which used both a mix of primary and secondary research. The project team kicked off the work with a series of 30 targeted interviews to essentially understand the landscape as seen through the eyes of kitchen operators, as well as a discussion guide for the focus group phase that followed. We also worked and connected with a number of ecosystem partners during this work, during this first phase, as well as kitchen users themselves. After this first phase, the project team divided Minnesota into 3 distinct geographic regions in order to hold more nuanced focus groups. The first region, the North region, represented Minnesota north of Hinckley. The Central region included the slice of Minnesota extending from Hinckley to the southern metro Twin Cities. And then the South region included Minnesota south of the Twin Cities to the Iowa border. The project team then performed 4 deep dive analyses or case studies to bring these learnings to life and understand how they look in the real world. And then finished up by overlaying national best practices, regional resources, and local regulations on top of the primary research findings. Now that that research approach is complete, the project team and sponsors are moving into what we'll call the analyze and activate portion of the project to put to practice what was uncovered. In the first phase of the research, the project team uncovered some early learnings that were shared with stakeholders at a fall 2022 Minnesota Department of Ag New Markets Program Advisory meeting. Specifically, the team was hearing first that entrepreneurs were finding kitchen space difficult to find, in large part because the publicly available indices were incomplete, out of date, or not actively managed. Additionally, the information that was available was incomplete and did not share any of the operational nuances, such as this kitchen is gluten-free, or the amenities of the space, such as the amount and type of storage available, equipment, or even kitchen layout. Second, we heard that there was a lack of general community knowledge regarding shared kitchen operations, in particular around how to become one, who can use them versus who must use them, and when do they need to be used. And then thirdly, what capabilities or services a food business may need from the kitchen itself to be successful and meet their licensing needs. The third overall point that we heard in these focus groups, in the initial interviews, is that the path to licensure for both the shared kitchen and for the food business itself is difficult to navigate and typically isn't a straight line. Fourth, and these next 3 are really lumped together as one, is that overhead costs such as building rent and utilities are high, while operating or human capacity is relatively low. And this essentially refers to the fact that most shared use commercial kitchens are 1 or 2 person operations. And this all leads to a relatively high failure rate for the kitchens themselves, especially when you consider that the primary customer is the highly volatile emerging food business that can't necessarily afford to pay kitchen rental fees that will pay back the costs of the facility itself. And the final initial output that we heard is really that because these emerging food businesses can't afford these high rental fees, operations tend to be low revenue or profit enterprises, regardless of the business structure. And while the business profitability will scale with the business size, these kitchens are capped by the available rental hours in the day, as well as the available space or capability. So even if they are able to scale and increase in size, they're going to be capped by simply time and space considerations without any sort of investment. These findings, following these initial interviews, were then expanded in significant detail following the geographic focus groups in an effort to better understand the whys behind these observations. Following the focus groups, as I mentioned, the findings were themed into 8 buckets, let's call them, some of which were simply expansions of the early findings. The first bucket focused on index and information. And what this means is that there's really no exhaustive, searchable, or quote unquote, actively managed for accuracy commercial kitchen index that exists. The Minnesota Department of Ag does host a list on its website, but it's an opt-in solution that is not necessarily actively managed. And an index should include certifications beyond location and availability. Certifications such as gluten-free or peanut-free, the capabilities of the kitchen, what its storage capabilities are, how do you access the building, and does it have any loading docks? What's the building layout? What equipment is available, and are there any restrictions to entry in the building, or maybe hours for the building? The second bucket is about resources and risk management. Ultimately, what we found and heard is that there are gaps in state and local level resources for developing, operating, and sustaining shared kitchens that should detail licensing and regulatory requirements, focusing on whether a certain facility could be a shared use space and what it would take to actually convert that space into a viable shared use commercial kitchen. The third component is something that we'd heard on the previous slide, that being that from a regulatory point of view, navigating the path to licensure is challenging and is simply a challenge. From a definition point of view, again, we heard this earlier, there is a general lack of community knowledge regarding shared commercial kitchens, particularly as it relates to how does a kitchen become a shared use commercial kitchen, who can use them versus who needs to use them, versus when does a business need to use them. And then finally, what capabilities a food business needs from the kitchen itself. The fifth bucket focused on demand profile, and we'll dig into this a little bit more later. But demand profile, and thus revenue potential, is different in the Twin Cities versus rural locations. So clearly location plays into the component of demand. And sometimes location results in expanded service offerings for these metro kitchens, providing a more complete solution for metro businesses. As I mentioned, we'll spend a bit more time on this one later. The sixth bucket is about utilization. And what we've seen and heard is that many facilities are underutilized based on both proximity to food businesses and the pipeline of users that may take advantage of that space, as well as an ability to accommodate the needs of these growing food businesses. In innovation, this theme is really all about a lack of recognition around what facilities could be commercial kitchens. In other words, unrealized facility opportunities are largely due to a lack of knowledge on what facilities are available, what actually qualifies a space for commercial production, and what steps can be taken to transition a prospective space into a certified one. And finally, this last theme of impact is a bit more esoteric in nature, but focuses mostly on the intended purpose of the space itself. In other words, the shared kitchen sector is, in some sense, and in what we heard through the research, is that in some sense, it's a public service that caters to the needs of the local community. Whether that need is geared towards servicing a specific ethnic group, whether that space is meant to be affordable kitchen access for startup food businesses, or whether it caters to scaling businesses that need more warehousing and fulfillment space. All of these buckets really helped the project team to get a better understanding of potential recommendations that could move the sector forward and propel the project sponsors and the ecosystem support organizations in general to identify solutions that can simply help move the sector forward. So now that we have a clear picture of the themed challenges and a little bit more of a clear picture on what they actually mean, the project team was able to distill these learnings into what we'll call 4 big eurekas or aha moments that were really associated with unlocking financial and hopefully long-term viability of these shared use commercial kitchen spaces. The first item is really to highlight that the shared commercial kitchen model is not necessarily broken, but at the same time, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. In other words, there are several operating models that can be successful if they are given the right environmental factors and operating resources. All told, the health and growth of the sector involves a combination of additional financial resources, policy support, and supplementing available information within an active community of practice, rather than developing a standard operating model that's intended to apply across all locations and all types of commercial kitchen opportunities. The second piece is that the kitchen user demand profile is the biggest differentiator between urban and rural locations. To clarify, the roadmap to a shared commercial kitchen in a rural community is not necessarily different from the metro, but the demand profile or the size of the user pipeline certainly is. In other words, the pathway to convert a church kitchen into a shared commercial kitchen space is the same whether that location is in Mora, Mankato, or Mendota Heights. The challenge, the ultimate challenge, is in reconciling how to drive demand, which translates to financial performance of the kitchen, with the total service offering. This also translates to an even greater need for rural locations to create economic development partnerships with the local community and local organizations that can help channel or funnel demand over a broader geographic region. Because at the end of the day, in a rural location, there tend not to be shared commercial kitchens in every town in a rural community or a large-scale, broad geographic region. Thus, it's even more important to make sure that the location of an existing space is known and economic development organizations can help funnel those users to the kitchen that is available for community use. The third solution space, the third eureka moment, was when we realized that it's better to use existing or underutilized space in communities rather than to build new facilities completely. Generally speaking, what this means is that it's difficult to overcome the costs of new construction when your user base of emerging food businesses is inherently volatile and may not be around a year from now, and ultimately is unable to afford kitchen rental fees that would allow you to pay back the costs of that construction, along with utilities and any other certification costs that come along with the kitchen itself. And it just so happens that we have a case study that highlights an example of this approach. Located in Pine Island, the Pico Works shared commercial kitchen took an existing shuttered A&W restaurant and converted this already ideal space into a fully outfitted and shared commercial kitchen and co-working space for community use. Now, I say ideal because this space was already a restaurant. Thus, it essentially had the infrastructure in place to become and easily become a certified and licensed commercial kitchen. Pico Works also showcases an innovative approach to market access for kitchen users, where they utilize the drive-through window that came with the restaurant as a way for food entrepreneurs to connect directly with their consumer base on-site and without a formal storefront. Today, the kitchen is 3,000 square feet with 9 regular members who use the space between 10 and 46 hours per week. And finally, the last big aha moment that we uncovered through this research is that business co-location, or locating the commercial kitchen in an existing space which already has another revenue stream may actually unlock profitability for a kitchen enterprise. This is in part due to the kitchen not having to rely solely on kitchen rental fees to pay the facility fees, but can also manifest in ways that drive new revenue streams for the kitchen or opportunities for the food businesses themselves. Take, for example, our second case study, the Harmony Community Co-op Kitchen in Bemidji, Minnesota. Now, this kitchen is co-located within the well-established Harmony Foods Co-op, a cooperatively owned grocery store that's been around since approximately 2012. Operating a shared kitchen within the retail food co-op store enables the leveraging of both specifically designed space and staffing resources to manage the kitchen. In essence, a shared resources model. Harmony's unique co-location inside a larger facility that also offers food services provides market access opportunities for kitchen users who may otherwise be limited to outlets like farmers markets. So in essence, this particular space allows not only for an opportunity to share costs with the retail grocery store itself, but also additional market access opportunities for the food entrepreneur as they look to expand and grow out their business venture. As a result of all this research and what we learned through the many different focus groups and one-on-one interviews, the project team identified a number of recommended activities categorized by implementation timeframe as short-term, medium-term, or long-term. Now, I'm not going to go through and read through all of the activities on this list, but suffice it to say that one of the key next steps as an implementation team is to comb through these recommendations in detail and define the actions that will have the most impact and bring the best opportunities to life in an effort to support this sector and ensure that our food businesses have a chance to grow effectively and, to Emily's point earlier, to stay in Minnesota. The project team does, however, want to call out the top short-term, high-impact activities that will be at the top of the implementation team's to-do list. These activities have been further categorized as either to be funded or to improve the economics of existing or potential spaces. In the category of to be funded, this first item is one that I've already alluded to, that being to develop an action-oriented implementation team that may or may not include MDA and AURI. The second item is to develop a new kitchen toolkit and a business model specific playbook for emerging shared kitchens that identifies facility standards, regulatory and licensing education for potential and existing shared kitchen facilities. In essence, this could be an online document that simply walks through how to start a commercial kitchen and what do you need to do to get there. So some might even call it the so you wanted to start a commercial kitchen guide, certainly something that we've used as an idea for playbooks around other topics in the past. The third high impact activity identified by the project team is to create and or update and centralize resources to create an active learning community of practice across kitchen facilities across the state. What we've learned over time is that an active learning community of practitioners can share best practices, what's worked, what didn't work, and really help to support and lift up each other in an effort to raise the collective knowledge base of everyone involved. Again, all in an effort to ensure that the sector itself can grow and support Minnesota businesses. And the final activity that we've identified that could be funded is to create a map of existing and underutilized potential shared kitchen facilities across the state, with a specific plan to maintain the relevancy of this index. And as I alluded to earlier, this map or index should also include specific attributes of each of those kitchens, which may include storage capabilities, equipment available, as well as certifications that exist, such as gluten-free or peanut-free, and restrictions on use of the kitchen itself. This is all in an effort to enhance the connection making between both food entrepreneurs and the kitchens themselves, as well as for prospective kitchen operators to identify the most likely locations, both in the metro and in rural communities, to place a kitchen by at least understanding where existing kitchens are today and where they might be most effectively located. In the second category of improving economics, the project team suggests that the MDA explore adjustment of the new markets cost sharing program to include support for kitchen space. And I think it's really important what Emily Jervey shared with us earlier, that the most recent proposal to the governor's budget included dollars that could potentially be earmarked for this use. And the New Markets program has had significant success with its cost sharing program in the past and has expanded significantly to include new activities over the pandemic, and even more recently to hopefully include dollars that could help support the business models of commercial kitchens, as well as the ongoing growth of food businesses. So certainly something that could be a high impact activity that could happen in relatively short order, though clearly that's something that needs to be thought out and executed in effective fashion. Emily also alluded to the idea that there could be opportunities to provide grants or expand the scope of existing grant programs to include kitchen facility enhancements, which could be used to build out storage and or sanitation capabilities in the kitchens themselves. Purpose of these types of grants or this type of work would really be to increase use of underutilized space to improve the financial viability. And that underutilized space could be pre-existing space that is not currently a kitchen, or to expand a kitchen space to increase their scale and thus move towards profitability. So the scope would be for both existing and potential shared kitchens. With that, I'd like to wrap up this summary by highlighting some tactical details about the release of the report. The final report we expect to see released next week publicly, or the week of February 13th at AURI.org. We would certainly welcome any commentary or feedback through the Contact Us link at the AURI.org website. Just be sure in your commentary to put Commercial Kitchens Report in the subject so we can make sure that that information gets to where it needs to go. And finally, our immediate next step, which I've alluded to earlier, is to conduct a working session with the report funders of AURI and MDA, as well as with the project team, to determine and activate against the selected and highest impact activities that have been outlined previously. On behalf of the project team, we would like to thank you for not only your attention during this webinar, but also for the thought leadership so freely given and outlined in this research. And as a member of the funding team, AURI would like to thank Clutch and the FoodWorks Group for their efforts in completing this research and putting together such a complete package of recommendations to really make a difference in the community. With that, I'll turn it back over to Dan to moderate the Q&A with the message that while the lead investigator, Emily Paul from the FoodWorks Group, is traveling today and was therefore unable to walk us through the hard work that she put together, she is online and available for those hard-hitting questions. Emily, I hope I was able to do your research justice. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Emily, for kicking us off here this afternoon. And just a reminder to our participants in this webinar that we do have Emily Paul and Aaron Heidecker both on the line as we move to Q&A. And if you have a question for any of the panelists, please put it in your Q&A portal on your screen, and we've got some great questions already. But before we do that, since we have two other participants here at the second half of our program. We'll just ask Aaron and Emily real quick if there was anything they would like to add to what was presented to get us started here today.
Dan, I don't think so. This is Emily Paul. Jason, you did a great job presenting our findings, and we look forward to answering questions as they come. And thanks everyone for your participation, especially those folks on the call that were integral in our research. We really appreciate it.
Aaron?
I'll just mirror Emily and just say thank you, Jason. You did a great job of going through the research. We're really excited to get this out to you and get the final report next week for everyone to really digest.
We have a large group listening in this afternoon and some great questions already coming in, starting with, and I'll these will be open questions, and maybe we'll just let anybody who wants to weigh in. We work on opening rural kitchens in Alaska, and we would like to integrate traditional foods on our menu. To make kitchens sustainable, we want to get them certified as USDA AMS vendors and prepare school and elder lunches in villages. Do you have any projects that rely on government contracting? Anybody want to take that one on?
Yeah, this is Emily Paul. I'm happy to connect with that person offline. We at FoodWorks Group actually have an active project in Southeast Alaska right now that we would be happy to connect on and kind of share some of our learnings and findings and make connections as able. So I'm happy to take that question offline with a follow-up email. My contact information should be a part of the last slide. So thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Can you talk about a food entrepreneur working with a restaurant or commercial kitchen in their area to utilize their kitchen to produce their product at a convenient time? Is there a regulatory issue with that, or is it just a deal that's worked out between the restaurant and the entrepreneur? How do those arrangements get put together?
Well, I'll start, and please, anyone else jump in here. I think it's important to note that restaurant has specific hours, and typically when we've heard those arrangements work, they've typically worked because the food entrepreneur was flexible enough to work in the off hours that the kitchen was not preparing food for the restaurant. Unfortunately, that typically has meant working after 10 p.m. at night and through the night, or maybe really early in the morning, again, depending upon the hours of the kitchen. So where I've heard that be successful more than anything else is as a deal that is essentially worked out between the restaurant and the entrepreneur itself. Because at the end of the day, a restaurant kitchen is, in general, a commercial kitchen, a licensed commercial kitchen. The only difference is that it's not a shared use commercial kitchen that actively rents out space to different food entrepreneurs. So oftentimes those are, let's call them more under the table. That is something that should be under the table, may not be the right word, but not necessarily formalized relationships, though an inspector still needs to be involved with utilization of that space when the business itself is getting licensed to become a wholesale food manufacturer.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I agree with Jason. This is Emily Paul. I think the additional, maybe a little nugget of secret to success for the operations that do integrate well, both entrepreneurs within an existing or dedicated majority operated anchor use, or whatever you want to call it, space, is that using a shift model where hours are tranched to be shared use, and there's minimum usage requirements, and that folks are out by a certain time. That tends to work well versus trying to ad hoc schedule around kitchen or service production hours. So really segmenting the day and tranching off when outside users can come in versus when the anchor user needs to be in production is kind of a secret for success there.
I know during your presentation, Jason, I really appreciated the A&W building being converted, because I think as you drive around Minnesota, just about every community has and you feel bad because they didn't make it, but they have that type of a facility kind of sitting there waiting for the next person, and a little innovation there to make it into a commercial kitchen. I like that story. I'd like to be curious to know how church kitchens showed up in the research. It seems like what we're struggling with is identifying underutilized space that isn't affiliated with a religious institution to have a space that feels welcoming for all. Any thoughts or suggestions?
I'm happy to take this one. I appreciate the person who made this comment, and we were really sensitive to and aware of recognizing places of faith and community centers really as our research category, less so the concept of quote unquote church kitchens. Kind of our charge at the beginning of the study utilized, beginning of our research utilized the term church kitchens, and we were really cognizant of not defining it by one denomination or one faith, but really looking at community centers and centers of faith as the defining group.
And Jason, I think you answered this next question toward the end of your presentation, but could you please share the report findings that you just presented on? And I think they're going to be available next week, you said, on the AURI website?
That is our plan. We've got some finishing touches to put on the report layout, but our hope is to get the final edits completed and out with the recording of this webinar next week.
Aaron or Emily Jervy, we got to get you worked into the program here somehow, but we have a commercial kitchen and are an established CPG brand, but have extra space. And the kitchen is rarely used after 4 o'clock in the afternoon or on weekends. We also have a small retail store. Is there a resource to help market this option? Are there resources available for creating contracts and use arrangements?
Emily Jervy, do you want to talk a little bit about the commercial kitchen list that is at least available on the MDA site?
Yeah, definitely. So we do, as I mentioned, we've been tracking this issue for a long time. And in addition to cost sharing and grants, we know how to keep a directory. That said, this area is a challenge for us, which is why in some conversations we've been seeing how we can partner with local and regional economic development agencies to keep a more accurate list and provide support to those agencies. So, but that said, we do have a list on our website. I can put a link in the chat to share commercial kitchen space to get people networked and producing, but it does go out of date very quickly and does require some dedicated resources to make that successful. But I do think that was interesting in the report. We heard that loud and clear that is a need of the community, and so I think we're going to try to tackle that in the best way that we can.
And Emily, to be clear about that list that is resident on the MDA website, that is what we'd call an opt-in list, correct? In that businesses actively need to look to get onto that list, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's that process? If somebody has a facility that they think should be on that list, what's the process?
They can reach out to our new markets team. I can put that information in our in the chat, but Brian Erickson and Jen Alexander, I think, are on this webinar, and they are maintaining that. So it could be as simple as an email to them.
Question comes that did your research address communities of color, and in particular tribal communities that have very different market needs?
Sure, I can take that. So in terms of specific tribal communities, we did not do a focus on unique one-off communities, but in looking at northern Minnesota specifically, that was definitely part of the conversation of the dialogue. In the report and the research, in terms of the report takeaways and findings, the impact section really takes a focus on equity and access to, both launching a kitchen as an owner operator and thinking about kind of from a funding, barriers to access, barriers to entry to the industry. From a funding perspective, what are some of those incentive programs, credits, and support services that might bolster someone who might be barrier to entry in another way get into the industry? So without calling out specifically tribal communities and the nuances there, I think that is definitely a charge for the next round of this work, looking critically at specific communities. And hopefully our recommendation of forming a task force would take that in as a key priority. So we kind
Very
of
good.
have teed that up for this next round of funding and resources.
And Dan,
And-
I would quickly
Yeah.
add to that just by saying that what's really important to note is that whatever action team does get put together probably needs to dive a little bit more deeply into this concept of how do the needs of individual kitchens with that offer support via mission to a specific ethnic group or to tribal communities, how do they need to differ? I think the research was able to showcase that the biggest difference between urban and rural communities is around user profile and the user pipeline. And I'm sorry, the demand profile and the user pipeline. And that isn't necessarily going to change in a tribal community as well. But those are things where it's really important to be working with the local economic development organizations to understand how to funnel that demand to make sure that a shared kitchen business is a successful one and can continue to maintain the needs of the community, whatever that community may be, as the businesses progress.
Well, as the questions keep coming in, we certainly are getting some diversity here. Do you have any experience with work release employment-based kitchens? Women inmates stats due to fentanyl epidemics rising. Department of Corrections maybe could fund employment for reintegration of prisoners back into their communities through some of these employment-based kitchens. Did this report go there at all, or maybe just in your life experiences in the organizations you work with? Do you have some experience there?
I'm happy to take that. We did not focus on that for this report, but I do know someone locally who has that on their radar. So if the person who asked that question wants to send me an email directly, I'm happy to broker that contact.
Excellent.
I'm also able to make that connection too, if it's of interest. So either way would be perfectly acceptable. I would just highlight that any sort of work release program would need to also incorporate specific training to work in a food business. Oftentimes to work in a shared use commercial kitchen, just as an entrepreneur, you need to at minimum have what's called serve safe training, which provides the basics around food safety and how to manage food for our packaged foods in the future. And if the goal is to start a food business, a part of that work release could also include some form of entrepreneur training, which is an element of the work that our other colleague is looking to do and to build on. So certainly opportunities that exist.
Here's someone that runs a Minnesota-based startup that works with underutilized restaurant kitchens to spin up new delivery-only brands, essentially creating their own ghost kitchen operating by existing staff. If they want to allow others to use their existing kitchen, they understand that they would need to convert to a commissary license. What's the legal path for turning existing kitchens into shared kitchens?
So I think that's right there is a microcosm of why there's such a need for a toolkit or a playbook. And so fleshing all of that out, taking different types of facilities, looking at different uses for the facilities, and then creating the path to licensure, right? And the path to developing and launching a space that serves a specific subset of food businesses is exactly the need, right? So, if in the report, you'll see that we came up with different scenarios and uncovered different scenarios and paths to integration and innovation of different food concepts co-located in one space. But the exact details of how to do so is exactly what that toolkit or that playbook would be intended to do or to offer.
Does anyone have an answer, or is it too complicated to just answer the last sentence? What's the legal path for turning an existing kitchen into a shared kitchen?
Emily, Paul, is that anything that you were able to uncover during your research in terms of, is there a specific path for converting an existing kitchen into a shared kitchen?
Yeah, there's definitely a checklist for, and again, we talk about this in the report, so I don't want to give away too much, but we definitely have a section that talks about kind of what would be that preliminary checklist in terms of facility function, equipment, safe egress, appropriate, surfaces and workspaces, all the way through appropriate cold storage, hand washing, et cetera, et cetera. So, turning an idle kitchen space into a space that is inspectable and licensable. You know, that toolkit and that playbook is exactly what we would want to create, really a play-by-play, step-by-step process. So without seeing this person's operation and looking at their space and understanding the user profile and user matrix, I don't think I can answer like, here are the 3 people you need to call and the three steps you need to take. So I'd be happy if this person wants to send us a note to provide a little bit of step-by-step guidance and do a mini triage with them in their space. Would be happy to do so.
How many share? Go ahead, Emily.
That that we're happy to be part of that toolkit discussion, and maybe that's out of the marketing division's purview, but maybe that's in our food and food safety division's purview, and they are fabulous, and I think some of them are on the webinar as well, and without throwing them under the bus, I think we can contribute to that discussion as well on licensing and food safety.
Excellent. At MDA, if our listener isn't aware. How many shared use kitchens currently exist in Minnesota that have survived at least 5 years? Somebody's questioning if it can be done, I guess, maybe. Anybody got a number?
Is this specific question how many have survived 5 years or how many are currently out there? I'm sorry.
Both. They asked how many were out there that have existed for at least 5 years.
So long-term success, essentially.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm happy to send the person the list of kind of the detailed locations and kind of what is quantifying and qualifying. Shared use being, you know, multiple stakeholder user community, you know, talking 20 plus food businesses versus, you know, 2 businesses that share and co-locate their operations, you know, in a shared space. Defining kind of those different operating models. Shared use kitchens located within an existing facility, shared use kitchens that are part of a food hub or a cooperative, versus those are just, you know, blanket open to a public versus those that are supporting a specific subset of entrepreneurs. There's a lot of qualifiers to that, which is why I think building out the index and the criteria and searchability of the different types of kitchens, you know, by zip code or by location would be a huge asset so that we could run a query on that exact question and, you know, probably answer it a couple different ways.
You talked about co-location as an important solution to profitability of shared use kitchens. Besides a food co-op, do you have any other examples of successful co-location models?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of food hubs in Minnesota that have shared use kitchens within them. And just to level set here for folks who aren't maybe familiar with the term food hub, you know, it's a place to store and redistribute locally grown, regionally grown food. So in many cases, it's a center for washing, packing, and cold storing specialty crops. But in other instances, it can also have a minimal value add processing function and or a full commercial kitchen. So that would be another example of a co-location function. A couple other ideas that come to mind and that entities that we looked into was the co-location of a food hall or some sort of customer facing point of sale entity, not dissimilar from a retail food cooperative, but one where actually the kitchen space is integrated in, you know, a sit down dining like atmosphere. So your customer facing kitchen space could also be your shared use kitchen space. That's another example. You know, there's also other opportunities like Jason talked about with PicoWorks, where it's taking a shuttered or highly underutilized space, one that has, you know, very minimal function or minimal utilization, and then making, you know, majority of that utilization be for shared use. So it might still be that anchor tenant or user being a bakery, let's say, right? That's producing 3 different product lines, but in terms of 100% utilization, they might only be at 20% of full capacity of the building. So that's another example of looking into dedicated production spaces that might have an anchor user or business, but that could open up to other functions.
And Dan, I would just add specific examples that Emily had alluded to. One is an additional case study in the report that will come out called the Good Acre in Falcon Heights, which is co-located with a food hub. And then the second one that is not necessarily in the study, but is one that we're aware of, is in Little Falls, Minnesota, and called Sprout, which is co-located with an indoor farmers market along with an artists community that is still primarily philanthropically funded, but certainly includes a very extensive commercial kitchen and cold storage space that helps to maintain the commissary kitchen itself.
We're getting into the final minutes of today's webinar. We're not going to get through all the questions, but we will capture them, and we'll have some of the participants in this webinar try to answer them at a later date. Here's someone that would like, I think Jason maybe, to comment more on the restaurant kitchen use that Jason responded to. Restaurant kitchens are designed to prepare and serve food immediately. They have little cold or frozen storage for large producers. Is that one of the barriers of using a restaurant, Jason?
It certainly is. And without getting into too much detail, and thanks, Kurt, for that comment. It's important to note that the difference between a shared use commercial kitchen and a restaurant kitchen is that restaurant kitchens are typically designed in order to create food that is meant to be immediately served, versus a shared use commercial kitchen that from the ground up would be designed to create food that's meant to be packaged and maybe stored for up to 3 to 6 months before your consumer would actually eat the product itself. So with that comes a need for different storage capabilities. And frankly, the turnaround in any storage spaces tends to be much slower for a shared use kitchen, which has to manage both raw ingredient inventory as well as finished product inventory after the products are actually created in the first place.
Well, we're going to finish with one comment question, and I'm going to let Erin Heidecker start, since I kind of left her out at the end of the loop here during this webinar. And I saw two things in the presentation, and maybe Erin, you want to hand it off to somebody, and I would welcome all of you to comment if you'd like to. But we saw that long list of difficulties from the early learnings, and then we saw the 8 buckets of challenges. So Erin Heidecker, I'll maybe start with you. What's next for this group now that they've seen this report? Are some of these challenges already being addressed, or is that going to be a process that we're going to see moving forward?
Yeah, I definitely think we identified some really great themes of ways that we can help the industry. One that definitely stands out most to me through all this research and all of the interviews that we did is really having that centralized hub or an index for the new food business owners that they can reference to help them overcome some of the startup barriers that they're faced with today. So really trying to address what can be a fear of failure to keep these new entrepreneurs from starting with shared commercial kitchens, just because of the unknown costs, unknown factors, legislations. I think it's just having that toolkit for them to be able to reference, and also having, really a task force behind it to keep it consistently updated is going to be really important for the future success of these kitchens and for the business owners.
And I jump onto that, Erin. Yeah, absolutely, Erin. And I would jump onto that and say, double down on that comment about task force. I think, different models, different operators, current operators and past have a lot to bring to the table. We were able to interview folks, over a series of hours and weeks, but I think this is longer term work, and the support of MDA, as Emily has clearly stated and put out there, is integral to creating these resources for both from an index as well as information standpoint, to make the path to developing more and stronger and better kitchens throughout the state accessible and transparent, right? So, and I think that sorry, my call dropped, but I wanted to add one last thing to Jason's comment earlier about the restaurant kitchens. He was spot on. I think cold storage, incremental cold storage, taking a small production kit, restaurant-like kitchen and making it be one for shared use really hinges on that available storage, cold, dry, refrigerated equipment. That seems integral, and that not just for restaurant kitchens, but faith centers, community centers, a lot of these idle, underutilized food production spaces, VFWs, American Legions, right? A lot of these places that have high quality kitchens in small communities, cold storage seems to be the biggest barrier to opening up to shared use. So I would put a priority on asset and infrastructure advancements, minimal or significant, that will take some of these idle facilities to the next step.
I think we're going to leave it there today. Mm-hmm. That concludes AURI Connect's webinar Wednesday for today, and we do want to thank Jason, Emily, Erin, and Emily for their time today. AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday is presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. We are interested in your feedback, so please respond when we send you our event evaluations. And remember, for more information on today's program or any of the work that AURI is involved in, you can go to auri.org. Now, March 8th, AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday will be back, and we'll be looking forward to a program around opportunities in value-added ag in Minnesota, enhanced through AURI's USDA Agricultural Innovation Center Program Grant Award. Looking forward to that. I also want to remind you that registration is now open for the New Uses Forum. It's coming up April 11th in the Twin Cities area. AURI and our partners, Compeer Financial and Georgetown's Rural Opportunity Initiative, are bringing together some of the most knowledgeable voices in the areas of finance, food, and agriculture. You can register right now at auri.swoogo, that's swoogo.com/NUF 2023. We hope to see you there. And you can always learn more about other work that AURI is involved with by going online to auri.org. We're looking forward to having you join us again in March for another AURI Connects Webinar Wednesday.